Welcome to Bridge the Gap, a show where we aim to build a bridge of understanding between opposing views. Each episode you'll see our participants sit down to discuss some thought-provoking statements.
Fathers have become disposable.
If they disagree with the statement, they'll leave their seat and allow those that agree to explain themselves.
And when I have been pregnant with my children, when we were in the hospital, the experience for my husband was like, hello, I'm here.
Those that disagree then return and express themselves to the rest of the group.
Nobody can tell me that if I leave, it's not gonna make a difference, basically. That's what it feels like for it to be disposable.
Hopefully building a bridge of understanding. Let's see what happens.
I come from a single parent household.
Please discuss.
Discuss.
Yeah.
Okay, mine in particular, I feel it was strange because when I hear about single parent households, it's like you have one parent and that's all you have. But my dad was always there. He just didn't get along with my mum. So I don't feel like my experience of a single parent household is the best because my dad was always there. Like he fought to stay as close to me as possible. The worst side of it was I was there through like custody battles. So I could say that my mum loved me and my dad loved me. So I don't feel no animosity to either of them. But I'm angry at both of them for not figuring it out. And I had to like deal with going to see my dad on some weekends and not others. Or if I wanted to go on holiday, my dad might say no, my mum says yes, I can't go on a holiday. Or if I get in trouble in school, just after I see my dad, I have to wait 2 weeks before he deals with, like I've been punished already, but he's still holding corn on me for 2 weeks ago and I've moved on from that. So you deal with those when you're going through like from one parent to another.
I think mine's kind of similar to yours. Like I lived with my mum because they broke up probably when just after I was born. But my mum got into a relationship and since then she's obviously been she got married, so she's been in that relationship since then. So I technically feel like I have two dads. So I've always had, like, in a sense, the best of both worlds because I've had my biological dad involved in my life heavily, and then I've had my stepdad, and then I've had my mum. So, and then obviously they had my brother as well. So it's always been, I don't even feel like it's been a single parent household for me. So that's why I didn't know what to kind of really do in that situation because it is a bit of a weird situation. But I feel like there's also, you do have problems because there's certain things that I would see that my brother has that I did not have. So even though I have my stepdad, my dad was still not present in the house. So it did kind of create kind of like a bit of a weird situation because there would be certain times where I would start calling my stepdad dad, which was a very kind of toxic situation in regards to how my dad felt as well, because then when I would go down to my dad, he would discuss that with me, but then I kind of didn't want to upset my mum when I go back home because she wanted to kind of create this family, which she did have, but I feel like that's where she kind of lacked. She didn't ever sit down and ask me, Nikki, are you comfortable with calling your stepdad dad? Do you see what I'm saying? And I think that's one thing I would say if I was to have, you know, when I do, because I've got my daughter, if I was to ever, you know, date someone else or marry, I wouldn't necessarily force it upon her to do that because I think it does, for a child, it puts a child in a really awkward position. Do you see what I'm saying? But other than that, yeah, that's kind of like me and my experience with that.
I had a fairly different experience. So I grew up in a single parent household, my mum. They were together when I was born, like in London until I was like 3, and they separated. And then because it's quite hard being a single mother in the UK, London is very expensive, my mum decided to get a better life to move to America. So we moved to America for about 9 years, and then we moved to Singapore for about 5 years, and then moved back here. But for me, the whole experience has been quite amazing because she was a single parent. That was like the push for her to move abroad and like give us the life that we probably would have never had if she decided to stay with our father. So I think even though a lot of people look at single parent and two parent households, or specifically single parent households, in a negative light, for me it was like the biggest blessing because the life I've had, like, it's been amazing and I couldn't really imagine it being that way if I was in a two parent household. I think my mum financially would have really struggled and would have been with my dad who wasn't very like supportive, and it just would have just been not a great experience. So even though it was difficult being a single parent, my mum, like, I think even for my brother and I, we just never really thought about, oh, we're in a single parent household, other people have two parents, because we just saw it as such a blessing, and we got so much love from other people. It's almost like a community was built around us. So we never really sort of noticed that we didn't have a dad around, because like our uncle stepped up, and then like teachers would love us more than, you know, a dad would, or family friends. So even though it might have been difficult for my mum, I think from a child's perspective, I found it overwhelmingly positive, even though it sounds like really bad, like I'm not promoting being a single parent, but just because you're a single parent doesn't necessarily mean your children might grow up as a particular type of way, or you necessarily have to be in financial difficulty. Sometimes it's what the push you need to go for a career that you wouldn't have gone if you're discussing with your partner, and they might be the reason why you didn't take that. So that was kind of my experience.
Yeah, it's kind of similar for me. So I was raised with my nan. So to me, she was my mum and my dad, and I had, you know, aunties and uncles and cousins and people from church, and it's good and it's nice. But again, for me, it wasn't mommy and it wasn't daddy. So I think for me, a long time, I kind of searched for that, and there's always been that void of not having the mum and the dad. But I'm grateful to my nan and everybody else, but it's still not the same. And I think every child, they need a mum and a dad, healthy mum and dad, you get me, sane mum and dad, to be there some way, somehow.
But you mentioned a void. Oh, yeah. You mentioned a void, but I don't think a void necessarily has to be a negative thing. So even though like my dad wasn't there, the father figure that I kind of had came from my uncles. They basically were like my dad. And then we had like a small community and like family friends that stepped in. So I never like felt like there was a void or something was missing. Because almost in a way it would be, in my mind, it would almost be like a disrespect to my mum being like trying to search for something when I had a great life. Like, trying to search for someone that doesn't really want to be involved. Yet there's someone right beside me and other people around me, family or not family, that kind of want to get involved. So I understand what you meant by void, but for me personally, yeah, technically there was a void, my dad wasn't there. But I never thought of it, even now, because that void was filled by people who aren't even family that would sort of give me that love, if that makes sense.
You spoke a bit about saying that you had other family members that was kind of like there to step in and be those role models. So like, for me, kind of growing up, I grew up in a single parent household as well. But my dad was around for certain parts, but for the main part, he wasn't there. So in the parts where he wasn't there, let's say I came from a family structure like yours, where my mother has her brother or other siblings there, and they could, let's say, step in and be that other male role model. That would have been maybe helpful, but I feel that growing up in a single parent household just with my mom, even though she was, so she took me to like physical activities, basketball, football, these kind of stuff, even though she was there for me and she supported me and all that kind of stuff. Essentially, it was kind of detrimental because there's certain things that a male has to provide to you that a female she can't do. But it's very interesting to hear and understand your perspective.
Sorry to like add on, but one thing you mentioned, like with my brother, he was trying to learn how to like shave. So if you're in a house full of like women, I remember he asked my grandma if she owned like shavers and stuff for like the face. And obviously my grandma was offended, be like, oh, I don't have a beard and stuff like that. So definitely in those sort of aspects, so that absent father figure would be really good. So a lot of the learning from him he had to sort of search like other places. So I definitely agree with you. There's those fundamentals, I definitely agree that were missed.
For me, my mum and dad separated when I was a young age. I have two other siblings, and then my mum went on to get married after a long time, and then they separated. So that's why I was like, I don't know if it's single, but my mum would say she was a single parent. So it's quite interesting that you mentioned as a child that, okay, there's not a word to feel, or it kind of be like a disrespect. But my perspective would be so much on like, not so much on the child, but the parent themselves. Like, if it doesn't have to be that way, and both parents can figure it out how to both be together and raise a healthy, wholesome child, then that's the preference for me.
Yeah.
So yeah. So while I'm like, I'll fly the flag for my mother and say she was an excellent mother, I still think it's not the more excellent way. If that makes sense.
What if, like, there was a situation, like, in my perspective, when the dad doesn't want to be involved whatsoever, would you say perhaps maybe not as a child and then later on in your life kind of have that relationship to sort of almost in a way build that preference that you mentioned?
That would be almost to just, that would be, exactly, it will be preference, isn't it?
Yeah.
At that stage you're grown, right?
Yeah.
So it will be if you want to, if that's your, if you want to have a relationship with your father, then why not have a relationship with your father? If you do, you don't. But it's sort of, they say it's never too late, but it's sort of kind of late at that sense because character's already been built. You know, experience already been had that can't be unhad. But like in my case, I guess my husband will argue that my dad didn't want to be there. We just don't know. But let's just say, for argument's sake, he didn't want to be there. Then what? You can't force a parent not to be there. To
Exactly.
be a parent doesn't
I
want
think
to be
it's
there to be
about
there.
just, for me, I think it's about just taking responsibility at the end of the day. I think, obviously, if you always have those situations where some people just don't want to be a parent, you may argue that, well, then don't lay with someone. But at the same time, you know, things happen and the child's here. So it's like, okay, it's a good question. What do you do in that situation? There's not really much you can do in that situation. But I think going back to what you were saying in regards to having both parents present is vital. I really do believe that. And I think even though I've experienced that, I have seen other people, it affect other people to a really, you know, in a detrimental way because because even with you explained, you know, having your dad not present, right? Emotionally, mentally, there must have been things you wanted to ask your dad probably about sex, for instance. Things that you probably wouldn't feel necessarily comfortable with going to your mum to sit down and have that kind of conversation. It's the same with if a female doesn't have her dad around, there's certain things you just wouldn't want to go to your dad about. And I think at the end of the day, circumstances happen. Like as I said earlier, some parents don't want to be involved for whatever reason that may be. Or maybe you have situations where parents passed away, because we need to also touch on that, because I think it's not all the time you have situations where a parent just decides that they're just going to up and leave. There's a lot of deeper other scenarios that happen. But I think at the same time, you need to look at the factor of not having both parents around. It's supposed to be balanced. There's supposed to be a 50-50 situation, because there is certain things that a man's supposed to do and there's certain things that a woman's supposed to do in the situation. And I think you cannot, as a single parent myself, my daughter's 2 years old, for me, it's not been long that I've been a parent for, but I'm telling you, it is so, so difficult. It's so, so difficult. It's not that I can't do it because I'm doing it. But it's just, I would prefer her dad to be present. Whether that's financially, emotionally, physically, it doesn't matter. I feel like there's so much, and also financially, mainly financially. For me, I think it's so important because, you know, I live in London. London is not cheap, expensive. It's expensive. So for me, I feel like having to try and juggle work, trying to be a mum, then trying to be there, like, make sure that we can go out on trips like the zoo or go to the park and stuff like that. It's draining. It's honestly draining. And I don't think a lot of single parents talk about it enough, because we've just got that mentality where we're just like, you know what, we can get on with it, we can do it. And we like to kind of think that, you know, we're almost superhuman. But at the same time, we are human beings. Do you see what I'm saying? And I think the kids aren't supposed to know that you are struggling, 100%. But at the same time, naturally, you are going to be struggling. That's facts. Whether you can do it, yes, you can. Everyone can do something. Everyone can accomplish anything. I do believe that, honestly. But doesn't mean it should be a choice that I should be by myself. No, because I did not have the child by myself.
I think sometimes in our culture especially,
Right.
like the struggle is glorified. And it's like,
Yeah.
we're given this role and we play into it. And it's like, yeah, I get it done and it's fine. But you're sad or you're depressed or you're confused or you're angry and you're frustrated. And it's like, your child's getting all of that.
Right.
Do you get me? And yeah, for the outside world, you're a bad gal. Do you get me? You're in charge, independent woman, you're doing it. But at home, that's your child has to live in that reality.
Right.
And I think that's what people fail to understand.